Hi, everyone. Thanks for tuning this episode of Nick Egan Times. In this episode, we have a distinguished guest. We have the nationally recognized Jeff Wenninger. Jeff is a retired LAPD lieutenant with 33 years of service and the founder and CEO of Law Enforcement Consultants, LLC. Jeff is nationally recognized an expert in law enforcement, use of force, and someone who has coordinated dignitary protection details for US presidents, vice presidents, first ladies, and visiting heads of state. Jeff later then expanded that expertise to overseeing security for prominent entertainers and managing venue security for a major league baseball team, from protecting dignitaries to guiding police reform today. Welcome to the highly decorated Jeff, and thanks for coming on the podcast.
Oh, thank you for having me.
You're welcome. All right, let's jump straight into it. Take us back. Tell us about your life growing up, your family, and everything relating to that.
Well, I have quite a unique background. My mother, she was a teenager when she became pregnant, and she put me up for adoption. I lived in a foster home for a short period of time before being adopted. And my parents, they wanted to have four children, each 1 year apart. And they were married for a number of years trying, and that's why they looked into adoption. And lo and behold, as life often has it, about the time that they were approved for adoption, my mother became pregnant with my oldest sister. And then they decided to go ahead and follow through with the adoption with me. And then they adopted my brother, who's Japanese. And then I had a foster sister that they also fostered that was black. So I was raised in the 60s and 70s in Ohio, the Midwest, with a multiracial family, which gave me some unique experiences and perspectives that I took into my law enforcement career.
Well, and with that, just speaking of that, that would have actually given you even further, I guess, how to describe it, resilience and understanding of minorities and everything like that. Obviously, dealing and growing up with the different ethnicities.
Well, it did. I mean, what it does is it makes you sensitive and aware of the microaggressions or micro racism that occurs, where people don't think it has an impact. Where a little snarky remark or a rolling of the eyes, they don't see much with that. However, it does impact people in a very negative way, especially when you see it repetitively over time. And really, I saw what I learned from it more than anything was the resilience of my mother. She always stood tall, held her head high, and conducted herself with poise and grace. And when people would make comments when we'd be at the grocery store and say, "Oh, all your children look so much alike," with a smile, with the veneer of a smile. My mother, she didn't bite. She would just continue on, and we would just finish what we were doing and carry on, and not allow people's lack of insight impact us in a negative way.
Incredible, and it seems to have worked out very well in the end anyway. All right. Tell us, how did you get into law enforcement and how that inspired you?
Well, it wasn't a traditional thing. I wish I could tell you that my entire life I wanted to be a police officer. That wasn't the case at all. I went to college on a full ride hockey scholarship. I was an elite athlete. And when I was 20 years old, I went out with a hockey teammate of mine and we went to a bar. And when the bar closed, we stepped out onto the sidewalk that wasn't designed to handle all the students that were flowing out onto it. So we ended up out into the street with a number of other students, and there was a car with some nice looking young ladies in it. And my buddy thought it'd be cute if he would just prop himself up on the hood and get their attention. Well, the girl driving didn't care for that. When she slammed on the brakes, he fell off the hood, snapped the antenna, and there's a police officer just up the street that saw it. So the police officer came down, grabbed my buddy, threw handcuffs on him, and threw him in the back seat of a police car. So we had a buddy system. I said, well, I need to find out where they're taking him, how long it's going to take to process him, and what it's going to cost me to get him out of jail. And when I confronted the officer, he was very belligerent, and he made it perfectly clear that I better get back up on the sidewalk or I was going to jail as well. Well, I had had a few beers, but I had my wits about me and I didn't want to go to jail. So I complied with his verbal commands. I went back up on the sidewalk, but it wasn't long before two other officers responded. And I saw the original officer point in my direction, and those two officers came over to confront me. But I had some sense of peace because one of them was a sergeant. And I thought, well, okay, this guy's going to bring some common sense to this situation. And they walked up to me and asked for my identification in not so many pleasant words. And as I reached for my identification, they proceeded to beat me. And it wasn't long before I had handcuffs on and I was in the backseat of a police car going down to the city jail. And when I got there, I asked where my buddy was, and they said, well, we released him. And I ended up being booked for disorderly conduct, resisting arrest, and interfering in official business. And I had done nothing wrong. So um, I fought those charges. I took it all the way to a jury trial where they offered me the option to sign a ticket with a $60 fine, and they would drop all three of the charges, and which I went ahead and did that. But ultimately, that piqued my interest in law enforcement, where I started taking criminal justice classes and things of that nature, because I was a finance major originally, and I found it interesting. And I wanted to be a professor of criminal justice. My father was a sociology professor, and he encouraged me before I started my PhD program to go get 5 years of law enforcement experience at a large law enforcement agency. And that's why I went out to Los Angeles with the intention of only staying 5 years and then coming back and finishing up my academic endeavors to be a university professor. Well, 33 years later, I retired from the LAPD. So, things changed.
Okay, and tell me about the business you opened post your career.
Well, I'm the founder and CEO of Law Enforcement Consultants, and we do a number of things. We are experts in police officer use of force, but more importantly, we're consultants to law enforcement agencies to improve the outcomes, reduce liability, improve efficiency, and ultimately have better outcomes for the communities that police are serving.
Wonderful. And when you look back at your law enforcement career, what are some career highlights when you look back at it and reflect, go, wow, that happened or this happened?
Well, I've really had the opportunity to work some really significant coveted positions. I worked Metropolitan Division, which is the tactical branch of the organization. That's where SWAT and K9 and the mounted unit are housed. I didn't work SWAT, but I worked what was called A platoon, which is a field platoon. We do a lot of high risk warrants, strategic crime suppression details, dignitary protection details. The president, vice president, first lady, or head of state that came to the city, as well as stakeouts on banks that we anticipated were going to be hit by bank robbers, so on and so forth. So it was a tactical background. But from there, while I was there in the late '90s, the DOJ, Department of Justice, was investigating the LAPD. And that was when the Rampart crash scandal occurred, which is the Rafael Perez scandal. And crash was a gang unit, it stands for Crime Resources Against Street Hoodlums. And essentially, we had officers that were committing bank robberies off duty, stealing pounds of cocaine out of evidence lockup and selling it on the streets for personal financial gain, planting guns at shooting scenes to justify officer-involved shootings. And one would say as something as minor as drinking on duty, but comparatively speaking, that's minor, but it's a very significant infraction, so to speak. But at the end of the day, it was a result of that I was then chosen when I promoted this to sergeant to be assigned to Rampart Division. And while there, I was put in charge of the new gang enforcement detail that replaced the crash unit that citywide was disbanded. And it was with the experience there and changing the culture under the consent decree, implementing the best practices of police management. And I did that for 3 years because there was a term limit, and I had to leave the unit after 3 years, as everybody who's assigned to it. And we did a great job. And I will tell you, I don't take any credit myself. That unit that I ran was a reflection of the officers that were assigned to that unit. And we were recognized with the meritorious unit citation. And ultimately, William Bratton was our chief of police at the time. He had been a commissioner of the NYPD prior to the LAPD. And I went and worked directly for him, where I briefed him on all officer-involved shootings and lethal force cases. And I wrote his rationale for the adjudication recommendations for all of those cases that are submitted to the Honorable Board of Police Commissioners, who are the ultimate adjudicators. And so those are the types of coveted positions where I had a seat at the table and was part of effective change and change the trajectory of the Los Angeles Police Department. And one could argue even policing here in the United States.
Incredible. It's just amazing. With you're talking about the police officers that were, I guess, doing things that were naughty and corrupt, I guess you probably call it. Did you have suspicions of people that you knew, or were there rumors beforehand that this was happening, or you had no idea?
Well, in regards to that specific types of criminal activity that the officers were engaged in, I wasn't assigned to Rampart at that time, so I wouldn't have had direct contact with them. But I can speak more from a generality of my experience while being on the department. Yes, I believe, I wouldn't be truthful if I told you there wasn't a certain subculture or element within the organization that tended to engage in these questionable type of activities. Now, I'm not saying the bank robberies and that sort of thing,
Yeah.
but bending the rules, so to speak, where the end justifies the means. And oftentimes, are you down for the cause was something that was often said, basically meaning, are you willing,
Yeah.
probable cause be damned to take this person to jail if necessary. And so you kind of knew who those people were, but you pick your crowd, you pick your flock. And I wasn't around those people. I never specifically directly saw things, but you knew what was going on.
Great. Thanks for sharing. And what was the hardest case or most high profile case that you ever dealt with personally?
Well, I mean, this isn't really probably the answer you would guess you would get, but it's the Rodney King excessive force case because I was a young officer, um, and I worked the riots, and then I worked 77th Division, which is the division which was the epicenter, Florence and Normandy, where Reginald Denny was hit over the head with a brick. That's where it all started, the riots, after the officers were found not guilty. And it was that experience and having an understanding of the community that we're serving, the challenges that faced law enforcement in trying to build back that trust, in facing the realities of how we were perceived by many in which the communities in which we served. And that was a huge challenge that really formed my entire career. So it's not something that later in my career that I was involved in investigating or, what have you. It was that historical moment in law enforcement and how that so significantly impacted the LAPD and ultimately law enforcement nationwide.
Amazing. Thanks for sharing. And did you have any mentors in the police force? Especially, you mentioned you were young at that time. Did you have anyone that I guess took you under your wing, under their wing and really helped you?
Throughout my career, I had people that I really looked up to, and I just released a book. It's called On Thin Ice: An LAPD Veteran's Journey to Reimagine Policing, and I talk about that. The mentors that I had that they didn't necessarily take me under their wing, but I watched and observed, and they would give you little pieces of wisdom that you could do what you chose with. And for instance, there was one that I had every time we would get a code 3 call, which is lights and sirens. He's like, "You stop, full stop at every intersection. We clear the intersection before we go. If we don't get there safely, then we become part of the problem." So, he was very measured and controlled, and he didn't allow adrenaline to impact him. And he had been raised in the communities in which we were policing down in South Los Angeles. And one thing that he told me, and it was that really resonated, was the importance of being accountable for every action that you take as a law enforcement officer. And the perfect example of that goes back to vehicle operation. Very early on in my career, I was involved in a vehicle pursuit of a stolen vehicle. And the individual that we were pursuing ran a red light, ended up involved in a traffic collision with a van, and there were two young children that were ejected and killed. And it very much made me question the importance of what we were really doing. Here we had a property crime, a stolen vehicle, that resulted in the death of two young innocent children. And as law enforcement officers, how can we better do this to have a better outcome where we hold people accountable to their criminal activity, but also we're better serving the community that we serve because we have a responsibility to every person that we pass during that pursuit. So it was people like that that gave me the courage to stand up and voice my opinion relative to how we potentially could do things better.
That's horrible. I mean, do you think that was one of those moments that really changed, I guess, the way you saw everything too? Like, I guess, you have those moments where it changes you just as an individual and matures you. Do you think that was one of those moments?
Well, yeah, it just kind of underscored what I felt was the importance, to be the most effective police force you possibly can. You need to be empathetic, compassionate, and be courageous. And what I mean by courageous is be willing to stand up and question the status quo, and not be satisfied that with we do it this way because we've always done it this way. Challenge things, look for a better way, and in a police culture that's very insular, it takes a lot of courage to do that because it sometimes can result in some consequences.
Because it's very political, I'm assuming.
Yes.
Cool. Um, Talk to me about and this really fascinates me. I'm interested in it. With presidents coming and heads of states and vice presidents and first ladies, tell me about the background behind that. What I mean by that is like the logistics of it. How far in advance do you know, and what actually goes into making this happen, making it happen?
Well, really, to give you a historical background,
Sure.
back when Robert Kennedy was shot and killed in Los Angeles at the Ambassador Hotel, when that event occurred, that's when the LAPD and the city of Los Angeles said, never again in our city, because the LAPD had nothing to do with that security detail.
Wow.
So moving forward, every detail that the Secret Service or the State Department would spin up in the city of Los Angeles, the LAPD would have intimate knowledge and involvement in that detail. So we would work with the Secret Service and the State Department. Oftentimes we would have plenty of time. We'd be assigned the detail. If you were the head of it, you'd be putting together the entire detail from the transportation, the motorcades to what's called RON, remain overnight, wherever the individual will be remaining overnight and whatever the event was. You choose all the posting and all the alternative routes and evacuation. I mean, it's very extensive. And but you would work with other entities, like I said, the Secret Service and the State Department. But that was the background that I had with that type of expertise, and then I carried that in. I ran the LAPD resources at the Dodger Stadium as a Dodger Stadium employee for 3 years for the Dodger games. Uh, a lot of these same principles all apply, whether you're talking about a principal protection of a VIP dignitary, or it's a stadium or an open air, baseball facility. So, yeah, it's very in depth, and 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 what's really shocking is with my experience and my background, some of these things that we have seen with the failures of the Secret Service in the past year are just shocking to me. I have a hard time reconciling how it possibly could even occur.
And would
But
that would you do you believe that goes on still to for example, obviously with the unfortunate Charlie Kirk, do you think that goes on to that state's police department, or it's actually more to do with the Secret Service, or like it's even his security detail, or even with Trump obviously getting a potential assassination two
well, the
years
buck
ago
stops
even.
with the Secret Service. I mean,
Right.
absolutely, the Secret Service is ultimately responsible, and the shortcomings of the Butler, PA shooting incident relative to the Secret Service's deployment and addressing the vulnerabilities, it's just inexcusable. It makes no sense to me. So, yes, initially they were trying to blame it on the local police and that it was their responsibility to cover that roof. That's not how it operates. It doesn't work that way. That is your principle. You're ultimately responsible as a Secret Service. So, any shortcomings are a result of your failure to plan and to have the most robust an appropriate tactical plan and deployment of all the resources that are necessary to ensure the safety of your principal.
Cool. And what was one moment where you were under incredible pressure that you look back at, and how did you handle it as a leader?
You can think about, being shot at and those sorts of things and those deadly force incidents and things. But that's really not, that's in the split second moment. And I wouldn't say that that is going to be the type of incident that I'd want to talk about. I would say it was when I was running the gang unit because I was changing the culture. And to change the culture, it required me to take positions that weren't popular. And what I mean by that is I was changing the entire measures of effectiveness of the unit that I was running. In the past, they just make felony arrests and look at the number of felony arrests and think that that was a reflection of good policing and the reduction of violent gang crime, where quite frankly it wasn't. So what I did is we focus on things that, quite frankly, aren't really sexy necessarily, and it's not adrenaline flowing type of police activity, but it's addressing stuff through the intelligence that you gather. And ultimately, I measured my officers by the filing rates of their arrests and the conviction rates and the amount of time that these people were sentenced to serve, and then compare that with the reduction of the violent gang crime that we were seeing. It's about going after those within the gangs that actually have an impact on the violent crime versus just getting large numbers of felony arrests. Listen, you can find gang members or gang associates selling narcotics on the streets and get all those felony arrests, but that's not going to reduce the violent gang crime because for every one of those that you arrest, there's three more to replace them. So, we had to move that model, change how we viewed our role and our responsibility and our mindset relative to how best can we achieve our goal of reducing violent crime. And the reality was I wasn't popular, and
Yeah,
that's stressful.
yeah, I could imagine. But you did an amazing job, so you should be incredibly proud. What would you like your legacy to be when you look back?
Well, really, that I lived what I preached, that I was a police officer that policed with empathy and compassion, but also had the courage to question and to challenge the status quo. And I hope that by doing that, that I'm setting an example for the future law enforcement officers of this country. The reality is with my book, I have an on thin ice scholarship where I'm giving $30,000 of my own money to university students who write an essay, and there's winners, the first, second, and third level, and it's a total of $30,000 will be given to them for scholarship because of the importance of education. There's studies been done that officers that have 4 years of university education or higher have 40% less use of force incidents than those officers that have less than that as far as education. So education very much is important relative to how you view the world and you view the sociological issues that impact law enforcement on a daily basis. And what that does is it changes your mindset. You see things differently because your beliefs and attitudes are going to impact your behaviors and actions. And through education, you see things through a different paradigm and you look at things that more objectively and you increase moral reasoning and those sorts of things. And that's why you see such a reduction in the use of force incidents. So, I practice what I preach, putting my money where my mouth is.
Yeah,
And I just hope that long term, long after I'm gone, that it has had some impact in a positive way.
for sure. Great. That's really incredible too, what you're doing. What's the best compliment you've ever received?
Best compliment I've ever received. Well, actually, it's quite funny. Being a collegiate Division I college athlete and looking the way that I do, I was a sergeant at Rampart, and a peer sergeant came, and I had worked with this officer, this sergeant, for a while, and said, "You know what, Jeff? When I first met you, I thought you were a dumb jock, but you're rather intelligent." So, well, it was just, you know, and I didn't know how to take that. Was that a compliment or was that, but I get it that I don't, I don't necessarily reflect what people would think they're
Yeah.
going to, to get from me as far as my attitudes and how I view the world.
Cool. And what's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Yeah, it's probably what my father used to always tell me. He's, stand by your convictions and be passionate. And even though doing that has created the most stress and hardship in my life, it's also created the instances where I've had the most rewarding feeling about what I've been able to accomplish.
Awesome. And what's the best piece of advice you would give someone, maybe a potential young Jeff?
I would say make sure that you do your due diligence in that you don't take anything for granted relative to the information that you're receiving. This day and age, we're bombarded with all kinds of information. It's at the tips of our fingers. And a lot of it is just motivated by political posturing, and you just can't accept things as being fully true. You have to do your due diligence. And then and only then can you form your opinions and then navigate the best path forward relative to how to address something.
Yeah. And what is your personal opinion on officers in schools, armed officers in schools?
Well, I guess I really just have to look at the data, and the data is really shocking. That school resource officers is what they call them here. Um, when there is a school resource officer present at a school when a school shooting occurs, three times more people are killed than when there is not one present. It's kind of counterintuitive, isn't it?
Why do you
But
think
it
that is?
oftentimes these individuals that can commit these types of acts are suicidal in nature. And they know that there will be a police officer there, and it just heightens
Yeah.
the escalation of the deadly actions that occur. The reality is that the data shows that what reduces and prevents these incidents from occurring is not having armed police officers in the schools. It's an increased number of student and adult trusted interactions and relationships. That's what makes a difference. Because 4 out of 5 school shootings, there is a minimum of one person other than the shooter that is aware that the shooting is going to occur before it happens. 93% of school shootings are pre-planned. So, what are we doing as law enforcement to ensure that we get the information necessary prior to something occurring so we can prevent it? Because the reality is this: if we're responding to a school shooting, we have already failed. And we need to ensure that we are creating an environment in the schools where students feel comfortable coming forward and sharing something they may know. So, as law enforcement, we can respond and hopefully prevent something from occurring.
And are you for everyone having guns, or do you think there should be like like young people shouldn't be able to get guns, especially?
Well, I'm an advocate of the Second Amendment. But I also believe that we need to be responsible and logical in some of the restrictions that are imposed. Obviously, if you look at these blueprints of people that are committing these school shootings, it's pretty much the same situation. There's a mental health aspect to it, one that clearly is obvious and just wasn't properly identified. Why? Because there's not these trusted relationships where people are coming forward and sharing that information. At the end of the day, when you're talking about intelligence, you're talking about gathering the information, assessing it, and then strategically responding to it. And we don't do a great job of that when we're dealing with people relative to mental health and their access to guns.
Cool. Great opinion and great advice. Thank you for sharing that. Um, and if you were 18 again and you could change anything, could be personally or professionally, what would you change?
Well, I mean, there's always something you would change. I mean, I think we would be being less than truthful if we said we wouldn't change something. I think I would have preferred to have learned things a little sooner in my career in regards to how to be the most effective leader. Oftentimes I was always very motivated and, held myself to a very high standard. When it came to my hockey, it was first with my hockey and then with my professional career. And the reality is that not everybody was like me or had the same mindset that I had. And I needed to better understand that in order to be able to reach them and help them better navigate their careers and maximize their potential as law enforcement officers. And it took me probably longer than I would have liked to truly learn that lesson.
Great. Jeff, thanks for coming on the podcast. I do appreciate it. It's incredible your career. It's been distinguished, and obviously even what you're doing now with your business. And yeah, I wish you nothing but the best in the future.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.